What if I told you the biggest charity song in heavy metal history was almost killed before it is even started by a rock god in a really, really bad mood? Imagine dozens of the most egotistical, leather-clad, competing rock stars of the 80s crammed into one studio. And the biggest drama wasn't a fist fight, but a guy in a white suit and a last-minute ghosting from a living legend. Hearing Aid was a project born out of frustration, fueled by an open bar, and then nearly buried alive by an army of lawyers. Here's how metal's massive, chaotic, and surprisingly clever answer to We Are the World barely managed to happen.
Like, subscribe. Thank you.
So it's 1985, and these two guys, Jimmy Bain and Vivian Campbell, the bassist and the hotshot young guitar player from the band Dio, they're driving around Los Angeles listening to the radio, and all they hear about is charity. It's the year of the Superstar benefit song. You had Band-Aid in the UK with Do They Know It's Christmas? Then you had the massive one in America, We Are the World. All these pop stars, all holding hands and singing for a cause, and it's everywhere. And Bain and Campbell are listening to the local station, KLOS, doing this big radiothon, and it hits them. They look at each other, and the same thought is bouncing around in their heads. Where are the metal bands? Where's everybody with long hair and a flying V guitar? It was like their entire genre, this massive stadium-filling force in popular music, was being completely ignored. It was all Lionel Richie and Cyndi Lauper. Nobody thought to call Judas Priest or Iron Maiden. It was a slight, and it made them feel like the freaks, the outcasts that the mainstream rock world was happy to take money from, but not invite to the big party. And so Bain and Campbell get an idea, a really big, loud idea. What if they did their own version? What if they made a metal We Are the World? So they get fired up. They go home and they start writing. They hash out the bones of a song, a real anthem. It's got the riffs, that soaring structure. It's got the space for a dozen different singers to come in and do their thing. And they call it Stars, and they know it's good. But they also know that two guys from Dio, even a band as big as Dio, can't pull this off alone. They need a general. They need a figurehead, somebody with the clout and the voice that everybody in the hard rock world respected. They needed their boss. So they reached out to Ronnie James Dio. They take their song, this thing they poured all their frustration and ambition into, and they go to Ronnie. And they figure he'll love it. He's the guy who writes about slaying dragons and standing up for the little guy. This is right in his wheelhouse. So they walk in, they lay it all out, the plan, the song, the vision of uniting the entire metal community. And Ronnie James Dio, the voice of a generation of headbangers, looks at them and shuts it down immediately. No interest. No friggin' way. Now you have to understand what was going on inside the Dio camp at this time. It was a mess. Ronnie was in a really dark place. A really, really dark place. He and his wife, manager Wendy Dio, had split up. They were still working together, which just made everything tense and weird. The band itself, the band had just put out these huge platinum albums, Holy Diver and Last in Line, and the band was already starting to crack. Vivian Campbell, the young gun guitarist, was getting fed up. I covered this in depth a few videos back. But he felt like he'd been promised a real partnership, an equitable situation. By the third album, it just wasn't happening. It felt less like a band and more like Ronnie and a bunch of hired hands. And Ronnie was feeling like Campbell was making a leverage play that was all about money. So the mood was just awful. Nobody wanted to be around Ronnie James Dio. Bitter, angry, and here come his two bandmates with this bright, shiny, optimistic idea about saving the world, and Ronnie was like, hell no. But Bain and Campbell didn't give up. Here they're believing in the idea too much. So for weeks they keep at him, keep bringing it up, keep pushing. They know that it just can't happen without him. Ronnie is the key. And then finally something breaks. Maybe it was their sheer persistence, or maybe it was a conversation with Wendy. Because Wendy, despite their personal issues, was still his manager. And she could see the big picture. She could see what a project like this could mean, not just for the cause, but for Ronnie. It was a chance to be a leader, the statesman for the genre he helped build. And somehow the message gets through. Ronnie flips. He's in. And once he's in, he's all in. He takes the music that Bain and Campbell wrote, goes off, writes these epic, hopeful lyrics about how we are the stars. He's back. The dark mood hasn't vanished, but he has a mission now. And that mission was to gather the armies of heavy metal. And this is where the real chaos starts. Vivian Campbell basically becomes a telemarketer for metal. He gets on the phone and just starts cold calling everybody. Calling rock stars at home, calling their managers, their agents, anybody he could get a number for. And he has the magic password. Ronnie is doing it. That was all it took. The respect for Ronnie James Dio was so immense that as soon as people heard his name, they said yes. Calls went out. Rob Halford from Judas Priest. Yep, in. Yngwie Malmsteen, he's in. Members of Iron Maiden, Quiet Riot, Twisted Sister, Ted Nugent, Neal Schon from Journey, George Lynch from Dokken. The list just kept growing. 40 of the biggest names in hard rock and heavy metal all agreeing to show up to A&M Studios in Hollywood on May 20th and 21st, 1985. The same studio where Quincy Jones had just produced We Are the World. Only this gathering was going to be a lot louder and have way, way more hairspray. So the day of the recording arrives, and it is a total scene. You have these guys who are normally rivals, competing for album sales and radio play, magazine covers. They're all in the same room, the sea of black leather jackets and ripped jeans. And at first, it's stiff and awkward. These guys are not used to collaborating. They're used to being the alpha dog in their own band. But then somebody makes a brilliant decision. They open the bar, and suddenly the mood loosens up. The booze starts flowing, the guys start talking and laughing, tension breaks, and for all the massive personalities in that room, and the potential for a full-scale ego war, there really weren't any. Not really. The respect for Ronnie, who was running the show, was just that powerful. He was the undisputed king in that room, and everybody fell in line. But that didn't mean there wasn't drama and weirdness. Of course there was. Dokken, the singer for Dokken, decided he wanted to stand out from the black-clad masses. So he shows up in a blindingly white suit, walking in looking like a character from Miami Vice. And Ronnie, with his signature dry wit, just looks at him and says, Hey, Don, GQ magazine called for you. Later, it's Dokken's turn to sing a solo line, and he's absolutely terrified. He later put it, he was scared shitless. And he has to sing in front of the voice, Ronnie James Dio. He goes in the booth, gives it his all, comes out, looks at Ronnie for approval, and Ronnie just says, you could do better. So Don has to go back in and do it again. The pressure was insane. Among the guitar players, just as intense. You had all these shredders in one place. Vivian Campbell joked that there were arguments over who had the biggest hair, but underneath it there was a real competition for bragging rights. Every guy who went in to record his solo wanted to blow everybody else away. Then, to cut through all that serious metal posturing, Spinal Tap shows up. Michael McKean, Harry Shearer, and characters as David St. Hubbins and Derek Smalls bring this dose of much-needed humor to the whole affair. They mingled, they did interviews for behind-the-scenes documentary. They treated it all with the hilarious seriousness of the characters. At one point, McKean, as St. Hubbins, is being interviewed and he sees Yngwie Malmsteen walk by, and he just deadpans to the camera. You can't really dust for vomit. It was the perfect absurdity for a perfectly absurd day. But the day wasn't without its disappointments. They had scored a major coup. They had gotten a commitment from a true rock god, founder of the whole genre, Jimmy Page, of Led Zeppelin, was going to come down and bestow them with a solo. Everybody was buzzing about it. And then he just didn't show up. Backed out after playing Live Aid a little while before. Nobody ever got a clear reason why. He just ghosted him. That was a huge letdown. Still, they got it done. They recorded the epic chorus with everybody singing together. They got all the individual vocal lines, got a guitar solo section that was basically a declaration of war between a dozen different six-string heroes. The song was finished. Documentary was filmed. Everybody went home feeling like they had been a part of something historic. They had stood up for their genre and done something good. They expected the song and the album, which would feature tracks donated by other bands, to come out almost immediately to ride the wave of all the other charity projects. And then nothing happened. The entire project slammed headfirst into a brick wall of corporate red tape. And the problem was the very thing that made the project so special, all the different artists involved. Each one of them was signed to a different record label, and each one of those record labels had an army of lawyers. And none of those lawyers wanted to sign off on letting their artist appear on a record released by a competing label. Heaven forbid. It became a legal nightmare. Phone calls went back and forth. Contracts were drafted and rejected. As we all know, if it doesn't make sense, there must be law involved. It was a quagmire of corporate nonsense, speaking of which. The passion of the artist, the urgency of the cause, none of it mattered to the suits. All they cared about was protecting their easy-earned dollars. And so here in Aid, this massive bolt of lightning that had managed to capture in a bottle just sat on this shelf. The momentum from the recording session died. The excitement faded. The world moved on. For more than 7 agonizing months, it was stuck in limbo. And finally, on New Year's Day, 1986, it was released. But by then, the timing was off. The impact blunted. It felt like it had missed its moment. But here's the thing. Even with the terrible delay, it still worked. The album and the single went on to raise over $3 million for famine relief in Africa. Probably like $300 million in today's dollars. And Ronnie, Jimmy, and Vivian, having seen what happened with some of the other charities, were incredibly smart about what they did with that money. They had heard the stories of food from projects like Band-Aid literally rotting on the docks because of corruption and disorganization. They decided they wouldn't just send food. That was a short-term fix. They used the hearing aid money to buy and ship agricultural machinery, tractors, plows, tools. They gave the people the ability to create their own long-term food supply. It was a quiet, brilliant move that made a real lasting difference, and it was the most metal solution possible. Don't just give a man a fish, give him a damn harvester to go along with it. It was a project born in a moment of darkness and frustration, united by a shared sense of identity, and almost sunk by the business it was a part of. Chaotic, egotistical, and ultimately noble mess. A moment VH1 would later call the single most metal moment of all time, and proof of the fact that even when the mainstream wasn't listening, the tribe of heavy metal could still make a hell of a noise when they put their mind to it.